Good morning. We are on page, the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer on page 427, and discussing Hamagbihi and the second word in that verse, Losheves. Hamagbihi, to elevate, but in order for it to settle, to dwell, to be present, if you wish. So he asked, Mahi, Yeshiva Zu Mahi, what is this yeshiva? What does it consist of? And why is it connected to Halah and Hagbah? Halah and Hagbah is elevating and lifting up, as we said, the whole purpose of Hamagbihi, of elevating the material existence through mitzvahs like tzedakah, lahachis through shvalim, sustaining and energizing it, bringing it to life, and elevating it to the yud of chachma, and even higher to the moyer, the source, which is the whole purpose of existence. Dira b'tachtenim. So what is for us to focus to Losheves and the connection to the yud? So he says, that the whole purpose of this elevation isn't to remain elevated, but is to draw it back down in Er Yosher. So just like the elevation, the Yerida rather, the descent of the Yud of Chachma into existence, the Torah coming down below, its purpose is Aliyah. So too, the Aliyah, he says, is the Kavanah, Einerak B'Shul Yerida de Er Yosher. Like we say afterwards, Mashpili Lires. So to bring it down to Eid Ein Sof, in the words that he says here, in a way that we should experience the divine essence down below, exactly as it is above. Lamata kamay lamay lamamish bli levush behelim klal, which is what will be that our master will no longer be concealed or covered by a garment. And that's his galus erin sof asmus lam atok begili gomer kameshu beremus asmus mamish. And where will he see that manifest in the most obvious way? In the Beis HaMikdash. Already in the Beis HaMikdash, even the first Beis HaMikdash and the second, we already talked about Arden, Malkama Arnein Min Amida, but that was not permanent. So the Mikdash Nitzchi, Lasalove Shiyeh Nitzchi, Saviyeme, the Koy Lasalove, that'll be Mochain L'Shivtacha Pa'alta. Be a Mochain L'Shivtacha. L'Shivtacha, the word from Yeshiva. Like here, the word Magbihi Losheves, that he will dwell. Remember, Dira b'tachtenim means that Atzmus will dwell in the lowest of worlds, like you live in your own home. Or in the words of Basa Legani, in the beginning of creation, it was Legani like Sivkan, Legan like Sivkan El Legani, Legnuni, the bridal chamber. It's his intimate place. This is his place. That's what Hashem wanted. He didn't want this material world to be a temporary pass-through, but this should become the place where the divine essence dwells in the fullest sense of the word. Machin l'shivtacha. L'shivtacha mamish lamata kamay l'mayla. The yesenaila, and even higher than l'mayla, because Atzmus Ein Sof is higher than l'mayla and mata, higher than emek reim and emek tachas. That's what we learned yesterday. That's the l'shivtacha. That's the Magbihi Losheves. Okay. And I was going to continue and elaborate on this. And as I mentioned, that this idea, what we're learning right now, is actually in the Maimer of the Alter Rebbe, he says it. But what is really makes this very full, the word I'm looking for, rich and comprehensive, is the Alter Rebbe just said it very briefly, that mitzvahs create a dira b'tachtenim, basically, because your mamshach alakus down below in the physical world. Torah, he called is hamshachim amayil lamata. Mitzvahs is elevating, but in a way that elevation brings it down into this world, like we just learned. And he elaborates a bit, especially more in the biur. But the whole idea of Yechudei Elah and Yechudei Tata, Hamagbihi and Hamashpili, the two levels of Dasei and Das Achna, and Atzmus is beyond that. You don't see that directly stated in Torah. Once you learn in the Mittler Rebbe, you go back, you could see that it's you could understand it from there. but it's the Mittler Rebbe that really drew it out. Remember, the Mittler Rebbe heard that Maimer from the Alter Rebbe, though very likely he discussed it with him. For all you know, much of what he says here, he actually heard directly from the Alter Rebbe. But regardless, even if he didn't hear it, it's the Mittler Rebbe. He's the son of the Alter Rebbe, and he's a Rebbe in his own right, and as such is elaborating. So when you take the Maimer of Torah Eir, which is much more condensed, much briefer, and you take this Maimer here, you see the whole thing come alive much broader than when you learn the Torah Eir on its own. Like Chachma Bina, Mittler Rebbe being the Bina of the Chachma of the Alter Rebbe. Just pointing it out, if you go back to Torah Eir, you could see this contrast. I do want to make the comparison, but I first want to finish a few more points here, because they are taken from Torah Eir, what we're going to learn now. But the Mittler Rebbe takes certain points and elaborates upon them. Okay, like even the question, what is Yeshiva Zu? What is the meaning of Losheves? So the Alter Rebbe just explains it. He doesn't ask the question. Mittler Rebbe is turning it into a far bigger sugya. Okay, so with that said, I'm ready to continue on. We're on the fifth line on page 427. Now he says like this, and this is relevant to the whole picture. We were speaking about La'asad Lave, Mashiach, Geula, and remember in Yiddishkeit, in Torah, Mashiach and Geula is a process, not just an event. Not an event that will happen at the end of time, disconnected from all the work that we did. No, Masenu Vavedesenu is the very essence of what shapes and defines La'asad Lave. In other words, there could be no La'asad Lave if there was no Aveda today. It's not just something that comes from above without our participation. We are the ones that build the Geula, so to speak, which explains why Geula is the letters Geula with an Aleph. In other words, without Geula, you don't have the word Geula. So he's now going to talk about this a bit more. And he not going to use the language of Tanya, Masenu Avedesenu, that I quoted from chapter 37, but the Teichen, the content is there. That we just said, that La'asad Lave will be the Gili of Atzmus Lamayla Kamei Lamata, or Lamata Kamei Lamayla, that will be a seamless unity of the divine presence, Machin L'Shiftacha, Hamagbihi Losheves, that the highest levels of Hamagbihi, reaching all the way to the Etzem, that comes through our Aveda, will manifest that divine essence down in this world. He says, Ach I efshel liyazeh be'elam haba. However, this revelation that we're talking about, this high state of Losheves, is not possible in Elam Haba ukahai gavne. Not sure what it means. The kahai gavne usually means etc. Does he mean Elam Haba and all its stages, or does he mean the broader sense Elam Haba and Chis HaMesim and the Mesa Mashiach and La'asad Lave? Not sure what the kahai gavne adds, but clearly in a bracket means that it was in a different manuscript. So he says a kahai gavne. So this level is of Elam Haba. They cannot manifest, they cannot be, if there was no preceding work of the Halah, this Halah that we're talking about, the elevation of Hamagbihi, in other words, take away the whole Aveda of Birurim, and you just have Gilead Lakus, you're not going to have this level of this Gilead La'asad Lave of Hamagbihi Losheves in this world. It is necessary to have the Birurim of Torah and Bitzvus Lamata, She'ela Be'er Chezer, that elevates. So we're elevating existence from the bottom up. Be'er Chezer, the refracted light, from a light that is coming from the bottom up, not from the top down. Where does it elevate to? B'mechuz ba'asmus ein sof baruch hu mamish, shalamayla mekol ikuru mokare ishtalshlus, mebeis deis hanal. It reaches all the way into the mechus and atzmus of ein sof, which is higher than everything, higher than the primary and the source even of ishtalshlus. In other words, it's not going just to the divine that relates to ishtalshlus, higher than that, and higher than even the beis deis of das elyon and das tachten hanal. In other words, what reaches that highest level? We remember Seif Ma'aseh B'Machshava Tchila, Nesava Kodesh Baruch Hu Liyis Baruch Dira B'Tachtenim. If you want to reach that Atzmus level of Atzmus, you need to make a Dira B'Tachtenim. You can't reach it in Elam Yisrael. He says that explicitly in Tanya, that the highest worlds, Hoyel Lahem Yeridim E'er Panav Baruch, they're lower. is dafka in tachtenim, where you reach and you fulfill the ultimate kavanah, like seif ma'aseh b'machshavet tchila, that what arose in his earliest intention is fulfilled with the end result, the end product in the lowest of worlds. Or naz tchilas b'sefer, another expression we used earlier, that the beginning is wedged in the end. So to reach that level of Hisnaasus Atzmis is dafka through the halah of Hamagbihi, and that's what brings the Losheves. So now he's explaining why the Losheves is dependent on the Hamagbihi. Because till now he asked a few questions. First of all, he said, we're talking about Hamagbihi. Why are we talking solely about Losheves? So he answered that because the kavanah of the aliyah is to bring down. But the question is, why is Losheves dafkin again to Hamagbihi? Like he said, what's the connection? The answer is because you can't have the Losheves, you can't have the dira b'tachtein, you can't have the mochen l'shiftacha if you don't have the Hamagbihi, the elevation of existence, the halah of whole of existence of the erchezer all the way to these highest of levels, because that's the only way you can reach that level of atzmus. Now the Eibishter himself obviously is beyond everything, but we're talking about us connecting to it. So be able to create a home, a dwelling place, a mochen l'shivtacha, that requires the halah of Hamagbihi of the Aveda. But who masha kosav Hamagbihi l'sheves, and that's what it says Hamagbihi l'sheves. Also part of the same, this is in Tehillim, Nochin Kisecha Ma'oz, that your Kisecha, your throne, is always established Ma'oz from the beginning, forever and ever, and from before all of everything. In other words, it's coming from the original level, the highest levels. Ma'oz here referring to like beyond, before Stalshalus, all the way in the core essence, before it all began. So that's the Hamagbihi. So Losheves is dependent on the Hamagbihi. And the kavanah of the Hamagbihi is to be Losheves. And there you have the meaning of these two words. Again, in Torah and the Alter Rebbe's Maimer, when you read this, you really see it all come. But when you read it in Torah itself, he says the points, but you don't fully appreciate. At least people like ourselves are not going to fully appreciate it. So here's another good example of the Mittler Rebbe's adding the whole dimension of understanding to the Alter Rebbe's mind. There's no chiddush here fundamentally, as in he's saying like a completely new thing, but his explanation of it and his elaboration helps us appreciate the whole context of the Alter Rebbe's mind. And of course, we will discuss how it relates to Ayin Beis, which is already obvious, the interface of the highest to the lowest. We're talking about the interface between Atzmus and existence, or the transcendent and the immanent. Okay. Before I continue, let me stop here if anybody wants to ask anything. Questions? No? Okay. Now, the next piece is actually, this is cited in the Maimer from the Alter Rebbe, and I think, and when we learned it then, I explained it also. So, but I think we have to first, let's learn a short piece from a medrash that he's going to quote. As you'll see, he says, "A medrash Rabbah."
So you said that the Losheves depends also on the Hamagbihi. You know that the Hamagbihi depends on the Losheves, but Losheves depends on the Hamagbihi.
Absolutely, he just said it explicitly. The kavanah of Hamagbihi is Losheves, and Losheves is possible only when you have the Hamagbihi, the halah of erchezer, of aveda mumata l'mayla, of Torah mitzvahs down below. He just said this. He said it explicitly. Yeah. I wouldn't use the word depend on both of them. The first one, the tachlis. Tachlis ikir of Hamagbihi is in order to bring it down into lamata, into mochen l'shivtacha, and the mochen l'shivtacha is only possible when you have the halah of the aveda of Hamagbihi, of elevating the world through Torah mitzvahs. That's what he just said. Yeah. So now he's going to quote. We just said Nochin Kisecha Me'oz. So I want to let's just read the medrash that he's going to quote. He's quoting now medrash. So I thought let's read the moshel in the medrash itself. I hope I have a medrash open here. So the Medrash is Shmois Rabbah, Pasha B'Shalach, where these psukim are said. Migdashana Ken Yedach from Oz Yoshid, like we said. Mochen L'Shiftach, about all that is from in Pashas B'Shalach. So the Medrash on this pasuk in Oz Yoshir says the following. He says like this. When it says Yoshir, the Medrash says, it brings Hadohu Diksiv. This is what the pasuk says in Tehillim. Nochen Kisacha Me'oz. Your throne is established from then. Ma'oz meaning from then, from eternal. And then he continues, the pasuk continues, that you are, that Me'elam Ata. That you are forever. In other words, Me'oz, that's the kavanah. The kavanah was not Nisava Kadosh Baruch Hu Liyas Baruch Dira B'Tachteinu, which precedes everything. That's a desire to have a machin l'shivtecha, to have a dwelling, a dira b'tachteinu. So he says the pasuk, the Oz Yoshir is about this pasuk. Your throne is established from then, and Rabbi Brachia brings for this a mashal. Oh, the Medrash brings a mashal, but he continues. Amar Brachia b'shem Rab Abahu, afal pisha me'elamata. Abrachis said in the name of Rabbi Abahu that even though that you are eternal, lo nisyashiv kisecha v'lo neidasa be'elamecha adsha amru banecha shira. Your throne was not consolidated, was not established, and you're not renowned in the world until your children sang a song of your praise. In other words, the Oz Yoshir, the Medrash is telling us, is how we, so to speak, crown God and bring God's presence into existence. Because again, Atzmus on his own, is obviously everywhere and forever and doesn't need all these things. However, since the kavanah is a dira b'tachtenim and dafkin tachtenim where the divine is concealed, and Hashem wants this world to be a home, a dwelling place, a ship machin l'shivtecha. Who does that? That's the Eden. That's the Shamas Yisrael. When they come down below, they do it through their Torah and mitzvahs. So the Medrash is saying that Oz Yoshir is talking about Nachin Kesechem Oz. That even though the Eibush is Take forever, like he says, Me'elamata, but your throne is not established. That's why we say Ein Melech B'lo Am, that we establish, we crown God, we accept God as king. It means we are revealing the divine presence in this world. That's why it says it was established from then. And now the Medrash explains this with a parable, with a mashal. Let's read the mashal, and then we'll go back to the Maimer of the Mitler Rebbe. Mashal l'melech she'asa milchama. This can be compared to a king that waged the war. He waged the war, v'nitzach, v'nitzeach. No, I'm sorry, v'notzach. V'notzach is this. And he was triumphant. He was victorious. But the Medrash continues, v'osa eisei Augustus. Once he won this war and was victorious, his subjects crowned him with the name Augustus. You know, you have, for example, in the Roman world, the Emperor Augustus. The Medrash is referring to a higher state of being a king. We'll soon see the difference between a regular king and Augustus. So his subjects conferred upon him the title of Augustus. The Mefarshim say that the emperor of Rome was called emperor, but then the second emperor, he was elevated to the level of called Augustus, and that became the name of the emperors of Rome afterwards. The Hisnaasus says Augustus comes from, it's a word not in Hebrew, that it refers to elevation, a continuous state of growth. Just pointing out from the commentaries. Okay, now he continues. Amrulai. They said to him, the subject said to the king, The king who fought the battle and was triumphant. Before you waged this war, you were a king. Achshav asinucha Augustus. Now that you waged the war and you've emerged victorious, we've given you a more elevated title called Augustus. So the question now is, what's the difference between the two, between regular king and Augustus? So the Medrash continues. Ma yesh kavod bein hamelech laAugustus. What is the difference in the honor that we confer to someone called a king and someone who's called Augustus? So he says, Ela hamelech omed ala luach v'Augustus yeshiv. A king is described as someone who's standing. So in other words, when they draw, the Medrash is using an example of an artist. When the artist draws a king, he will draw the king as a standing king. He's standing upright. That means ala luach. Ala luach means on the tablet that the artist draws or sculpts or carves, however you define it. So the Melech is standing. V'Augustus, however, is depicted in a sitting position. And the commentaries explain what's the difference. What's the difference? Why is he standing? Why is he sitting? So they say like this, that standing means you're ready to go to battle. You have to be vigilant and ready for battle. That's why you're standing. You can't be sitting comfortably. In other words, the sitting position is a sign that you finished the job. You settled in, and now you're dwelling there. Remember, mochen l'shivtecha, yeshiva. That's the key thing that he wants to focus on, not amida. So standing, you remain standing. When a king is standing, even though he's king, but he's still in the position, he's ready to make a move. Sitting indicates that he's now in a state of peace and settled in. That's what the commentaries say. Augustus' seated position, he's already prevailed all his opposition, and now he's sitting in a peaceful, settled state. That's what the commentaries explain. That's the mashal. What's the nimshal? This parable comes to tell us what's the moral of this. So the Medrash continues. Kach amru Yisrael. So too, Yisrael say to Hashem like this. Be'emes achale barosay lamecha hayisa ata. Hashem is saying, the Israel, Yisrael, the Eden are saying to Hashem, when you had not yet created the world, you were you. You were completely intact. You were you. That's what they say. Hayisa ata. Interesting expression. Mishabarasa oisay atahu. And now since you created, you are he. You are the same he as if you were before you created the world. And that's why the Psalm says, that you remain completely as you were before you created, the way you are after you created. Remember, the Leisha Nisi, that God is Etzem, it does not change. The changes happen due to the Parsa and the Tzimtzum from our perspective. But from Matzma's point of view, there's no difference between Das Elin and Das Tach. So the Psalm continues, the eternal are you. So Elakav Yochel Emed. However, you were as it were standing. Shenemer Omad Vayimded Oretz. He stood and measured out the land. That's what the pasuk in Chavokuk says. Aval Mishamada Tebiyam Va'amrus V'manu Shira. But once you stood and prevailed over our enemies at Kriyas Yamsuf, this is when the Yidden said, Oz Yoshir, and we uttered a song before you, then Lefanecha Ba'oz. And we said with the word Oz, remember Oz Yoshir is similar to the same word as Oz, Nochin Kisecha Ma'oz. So when we stood and we uttered a song before you with the word then, Nisyashva Malchuscha v'Kisecha Nochin. That's where your reign was consolidated and your throne was established. You are, in other words, seated now. You became settled in. So before existence, we don't know what would happen if existence would defy God? Would you be able to manifest godliness in this world? You could say it would be a constant battle. That's a melech before he's called Augustus. But once he wins the war, and where do we see that? After Yetzias Mitzrayim, and they prevailed over the Egyptians, and the Eibishter destroyed all the Egyptians. Now we could say that godliness is becoming settled into a material world, even when you're dealing with oppressors and battles. He won the battle, so now we could say, Oz, Nochin Kisechem Oz, now you can settle in, and godliness will become part of the reality of this existence. Nisyashva Malchuscha Yeremus Kasal, your throne was established. Havin Nochin Kisecha Ma'oz, Ba'oz Yashir. So we see from this, when was the throne established? Oz, Ma'oz, at Oz Yashir, when we said Oz Yashir. And that's when Moshe and Yisrael began to sing Oz Yashir, Oz. At that point, because they saw this song represents this Hisyashvus. Now we all know that still was not the Geula, but it was the beginning. It was like Matan Torah would come after that, and that would be the beginning of transforming this world into a Dira B'Tachtein. La'asid Lavei will be the permanent state of that, and the complete and a complete way for the entire world. But the process began there, so there was something that happened after Yetzias Mitzrayim and Kriyas Yamsuf that established, and that's the level called Augustus. That's the Medrash. It's a fascinating Medrash on its own. Yeah. Now let's learn in the Maimer how the Mittler Rebbe, taken from the Alter Rebbe's Maimer, explains this. Remember, the point here is Shiftacha, Hamagbihi Losheves. And you see here how Chassidus takes a Medrash and turns it into such a fundamental piece. Because when you read the Medrash itself, it doesn't say that's the purpose of creation. It's not talking about Atzmus. It's talking about the difference between, but when you read it with Chassidus, you get the whole, it's a whole understanding of a whole stage in history where we're making the divine present. Now remember also the Medrash that I referred to earlier, Basel Legani, what do we say? That there was the Ikar Shechina B'Tachtenim Hes. The Shechina was below, but then the Chet Eitz Hadas and the subsequent sins caused the Shechina to elevate and be concealed. Nistalka Shechina. Avram Avinu began the process of bringing back the Shechina. And what did Moshe Rabbeinu do 7 generations later? He built the Mishkan, B'Shachanti B'Seichem, which followed Matan Torah, which followed Kriyas Yamsuf and Yetzias Mitzrayim. So you see, the idea of establishing the divine presence is in that Medrash as well, and that's what he's saying here. So now let's read this now inside to see how the Mittler Rebbe explains it, and then I'll stop again for any questions. So he says, so now that he brought Humashkos Hamagbihi Losheves, Kumeshikosav Nochen Kisecha Ma'oz, Ukumeshikosav Medrash Rabbah, like he writes in Medrash Rabbah, the Medrash Rabbah we just read. Moshel Bezeh, Augustus Yeshiv Melech Emed. That Augustus sits and the king stands. The Augustus who Melech ala Malachim. Augustus is the king of all kings. He's a superior state. He's the king of all kings. That's how he's interpreting here. Well, Lamaila, what is that Lamaila? We're not talking about the Eibishter as Malchus of Atzilus or Malchus of Bria. We're talking about Malchus of Ein Sof, Hainu B'chinas HaMalchus, the Ein Sof, K'meishehu Bereishis Atzmi Mamish. We're talking about the highest levels of Malchus, as it's Augustus, not as a Melech. Melech Malchei Hamloch. In the Remus Atzmis Mamish that we've been discussing, that the highest levels of the divine essence, Nikra Melech Malchei Hamloch. He's the king and king of all kings. That's the moshel of Augustus on the Eibishter. The Mashen is Samson Batzmusei, Lias Malchusei Malchus Kol Elomim, because what we speak about after the Simsum, that after the divine concealed his Oyer, in order to be Malchusei Malchus Kol Elomim, that's already, as he's a king, that relates to existence. Malchusei Malchus Kol Elomim, but who, P'chinas Malchus, the answer Shem is Samson B'Kavachut, that's already how Malchus of Ein Sof descends and gets concealed through in the Kavachut, which is only a very thin line. It's not Ein Sof in its full glory like before the Tzimtzum. Li'es Mokel Abiyah. That's how Malchus descends below to become a source for Biyah, for Abiyah, For Atzilus B'ri Yitziraseh, that's already Elikus as it relates to existence. Ad Malchus that Atzilus B'Biyah Ki Yadua. So becoming a mocker for Biyah until it comes to Malchus of Atzilus, which then will become Malchus of the words of the worlds of Biyah below it. Ki Yadua. Zeu shenikra Melech ha'elam b'chlal. That's the Eibishter as he's called the king of the world, the king of the universe. That's already as he relates to the universe. V'zeu shekosov Hashem Melech Geus Lovish. We say Hashem Melech Geus Lovish, that God's greatness, he dresses in the garb of Geus, of greatness, and Islabish b'tzimtzum liyus Geus Lovish. There he's already in Islabish, there's a lavush. So it's a melech, but it's a melech in the garments, the royal garments, as he relates to his subjects, as he relates to his kingdom. Through the tzimtzum, the Geus Lovish, melech ala elamis. He's a king over the world. Then he's called melech. Like we say, there's no king without a nation. So the king relates to the nation. So it's true he's a king, and therefore he's above and exalted beyond, above his subject, but still it's mugbelas, it's limited, it's the divine as it relates to existence. It's Malchus, but it's Malchus kol elamim. That he's raised up, not misnasa be'etzem. He's not fundamentally beyond everything. He's misnasa miyamei selam is the expression. From the days of the world, meaning he relates, he's higher than time, basically. The Hisnaasus Atzmis. And as this, however high this is, you can't compare it at all to Hisnaasus Atzmis, where you're talking about Atzmus as he's completely beyond everything. Then you don't call him Melech HaElam, you call him Melech HaKodesh, completely removed. Or Melech Yochid Levade. Or you call him Melech Yochid, meaning he's all alone, not as he relates to something else. He's singular and exclusive. Before he concealed himself, before he descended and concealed himself in the Kavachut. To be called Chai Elamim, the life of existence. That's the lower level. So now we're talking about the higher level. But he's not finished. The next paragraph, even though it's a separate paragraph, continues to discuss this. So let's read a little more before I sum it all up. And what we just said, that's the difference in Augustus, that's Hisnaasus Atzmis, and Melech Stam, which is Melech al Kol Elamim. She'ein arech lemelech al evodim. There's no comparison between a king over his servants, legabe melech al malachim, compared to a king over the kings. Augustus, remember we said, is Malchus, is the melech al malachim, melech malchei malachim. Melech is a melech al avodim. You can't compare. Acha emed lefnei Augustus, ke'eved lefnei melech. And now he adds to the point that this lower level of melech, he stands before Augustus like a servant before a king. So even though he's a king to his subjects, but compared to Augustus, he's like a servant. Kach Malchus the Ein Sof Atzmai Melech Yochid. So too with Malchus of Ein Sof, the higher level of Melech Yochid, the singular, the exclusive Melech, the Etzem. Hashem Melech B'terem Kol, like we say in Adon Elam, that he ruled before it all. We're talking about not as he relates, not the Melech as he's a melech within existence. But b'terem kol yitzur nivra, before anything was shaped and created. But achar kach le'eis nasa b'cheftzei, but it's saying haposhen melech shemai nikr k'may melech hala. And only afterwards, in his desire and his will, the king became a king that will be called melech al am nifred. He'll be called a king as he relates to a nation that is separate from him. But b'terem kol yitzur nivra, he's a malchus like melech yachid, melech kodesh, completely removed. So he says this level of Augustus, Yeshiv, Zeu b'chinas Hisnaasus hamelo de yochid levade hameruma ma'oz. So this is the level that of the higher level that is not dealing with oppressors or enemies and fighting battles. He's already won all the battles, and he's established himself. Melech yochid levade hameruma ma'oz, like the Medrash says. V'hu mashakosav nochin kisecha ma'oz me'elama ein sof. That is established his throne forever, Ma'elam Ein Sof, from the world of Ein Sof, pre-Tzimtzum, and pre all these levels of the divine as it relates to existence. Prior to the Tzimtzum Arishan, that would from where the Kavachut would emerge. Just want to see how much more to go here. Let me stop here, even though it's the middle of the subject, but I've read a lot. Unless you want me to continue, because I'd like to finish the whole subject before we stop.
Here's that word again. Azai,
But just in case somebody wants some explanation of what I read till now, let me stop for a moment and then we'll continue. But he's not finished the subject, so some questions may be answered as we continue reading.
What does it mean? You said in Donald, he's a king before the subjects, because we just got through with saying that you're not a king unless you have subjects. What does that mean?
That's the lower level. That's the king as he relates to existence. But then the God is a king because he's fundamentally exalted beyond everything. He doesn't need anyone to be exalted. He doesn't need you don't need to compare him to anything. He's just fundamentally a removed entity that's completely beyond everything. The goal is that we want to experience that part of Atzmus, that aspect of Atzmus down below. We don't just want, in other words, to crown God as king as he relates to us. We want to draw down the highest levels. And that's when Yidden do Torah and mitzvahs below and they fulfill what God desired to make a dira b'tachtenim and make this world into a home for God, where he dwells here in a permanent way. You're bringing down that higher level of Elokus that he's talking about, that it was called Hisnaasus Atzmis, or the different terms he's using here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I was just saying that the word Az is here also in Adon Olam, Azai Melech Shmo Nikra.
Okay. Continuing, or anybody wants to ask or comment anything else? Okay, let's continue. So he continued. Well, the fee. I'm 5 lines from the bottom of the page. And because this level, the lower level of the king, as he's a king over the universe, in general, that manifests itself through the tzimtzum. Once the divine, the Ein Sof went through a concealment, so now the divine is more diminished, like a kavachut. It's no longer Ein Sof that's completely unbridled and seamless. It's gone to kavachut, the richuk mokim, and it's, so to speak, berichuk mokim, distant from its original place. He doesn't mean distant physically. He means here that it's removed, because Ein Sof before the tzimtzum, there was no kavachut. It was all Ein Sof, a complete field of energy of divine consciousness. Nothing else existed. No, there was no room for anything else. Now the tzimtzum has created a richuk mokim, shu nikra mokim ponei. That's why the Eitz Chaim calls it a mokim ponei, an empty space, v'chol al reikon, and an empty hole, like a black hole. Like he said right at the beginning of Eitz Chaim, that's what the tzimtzum did. It created like a space, an empty space, like the teacher who conceals his ideas. So all you have is an empty space on a conscious level. We're not talking about what's beyond the conscious. Lekach, and because that's the case, lekach ba'aliyas hamadregas k'may la'osid love. And that's why when the levels will be elevated, when we'll elevate level by level, k'may la'osid love, like it will be in the future, she'izgala melech yochid, when there will be the revelation, not just of melech ha'la'ela, but melech yochid, the singular, the exclusive melech, the higher level, yeh b'chinas bittul b'melech geis lavish. Not sure what that means. I'm assuming it means there'll be the bittul of the melech. The melech ha'olam, like we said, will be bottled to the melech malchei hamlachim. So the lower level of Malchus will be bottled. That's what it sounds like to me. I'm not sure. Let me continue reading, and maybe we can go back and see what he means here with that. Because melech and b'chal b'adei tzimtzum, So when there'll be the aliyah, so it'll be the bittul b'melech geis lovish. Remember, melech geis lovish, he said before, is the melech as he manifests in a garment. Mashenkin ato, that's l'asad love. But today, melech yeshiv, the king sits. K'mashikosav yeshiv Hashem melech la'elam, shem isamtzim atzmei, b'yeshiva zu liyis melech ala ishtalshlus. Okay, I see what he's saying here. He's adding something that the Medrash doesn't say. That's why I got a little confused there, but I'll explain. Till now, we've said the following. A melech stands, Augustus, melech malchi amlochim, sits. Why? Because standing still shows that you're in a state of preparing yourself. You're not in a final settled state. Aymed also indicates a level of bittul. To whom? Who do you stand for when you're bottled? So when you stand. So he explained, because the melech stands before Augustus, like an eved before a melech. So even though he's a king and his subjects will stand before him, but when he comes in the presence of the melech malchi amlochim, like he said, melech of Ein Sof, then he's ke'eved lefnei melech, and he stands Aymed lefnei Augustus, ke'eved lefnei melech. So that's why he stands. But we do find, and I think that's what the Mittler Rebbe is coming to qualify. We do find the concept even today of a king sitting. King is not always standing, even though we only have a lower level of Gili of Malchus. So he says, Ata Melech Yeshiv, the fact that we have today a Melech that stands, Kamashkosav Yeshiv Hashem Melech La'elam, even the Melech Elam, we say he's sitting, not standing. Shemisamtzimatz may be yeshiva zu. So it's a different type of sitting. That's what he's saying. He conceals himself in the yeshiva. Yeshiva here is not indicating the same yeshiva like the Augustus La'asad Lavi, which is that God is completely settled in and established and therefore sits in peace, so to speak. Is at home. Like when we say yeshiva and yeshiva, why do we call a school a yeshiva? It's not just because students sit on the benches and study, is because it's meant to be Torah b'yashvus. The Torah is totally integrated. Yeshiva is a sign of integration. But he's saying now, today, the sitting is not necessarily the integration, it's that it's being misamtzim in a state of yeshiva zulius melech ala ishtalshlus. So even being a melech and ishtalshlus, there's a state of standing, and there's a state of sitting when he settles into his chair, but more through a tzimtzum. Whereas the melech yeshiv of Augustus is without a tzimtzum. I believe that's what he's saying here. But let's read on to make sure I'm right. So the next page, 428. V'omnam la'asad love be'elam haba. That's today. But however, la'asad love, in the future, be'elam haba, in the world to come, yegili de melech yochid bereishis Atzmis lamata kamay lamayla. Then there will be a yeshiva of a different sort. The gili of melech yochid, the melech that is exclusive and beyond existence, in his Reishis Atzmis, as he is completely on his own, will be lamatu exactly as he is above. That's the yeshiva we were speaking about. Lamatu kamay lamayla, k'meshikosav atik yemim yosiv al kursaya. Like the pasuk in Daniel says, atik yemin, which is the highest level of keser, will be yosiv, will sit. Yosiv is from the word yeshiva in Aramaic, or the language of Daniel, on al kursaya, on his throne. That is a higher level of yeshiva. So he's basically saying that after the tzimtzum, there's also an element of yeshiva, but that's more of drawing down, like you'd say a teacher who settles in and relates to his students. So a king relating to his people, there's a form of yeshiva there. But in essence, La'asad Lavi, he'll be standing because he'll be bottled to the Augustus, the Melech Malchi Amlochim. Whereas the Melech Malchi Amlochim will be in the state of yeshiva because you'll have Atzmis Reimamus below as it is above, which is ultimate yeshiva. Hamagbihi Losheves. That's what he's saying.
So at that point, the Abishter could sit and there's no diminishment like we talked about many times.
Correct. Yeah. No diminishment. Gili lamata kamay lamayla without any tzimtzum, to the point where he said you even skip over the das and das tachten element. Yeah. Okay. The zeu sha'emrim, and this is what we say, mimkeimcha mamish, tefia v'timlech. He brought this before Sefia v'simlech, that from your mokim, mimkeimcha, your place, not our place, not your place as it relates to us, but from your essential place, meaning the Atzmis dike place where Atzmus is completely on his own, Sefia, you will appear, v'simlech, and you will rule. V'chein gali kveid malchus chamamish. Kveid malchus chamamish, your malchus, meaning not Malchus as it relates to something else. Your core essential Malchus will be revealed. Hashem yimlech loshen lahaba. Hashem yimlech le'elam vod. That you will rule lahaba, loshen lahaba in the future. So all that's referring to this higher level that will be la'ased love. But now he goes back to explain why we call it yeshiva. Ach im kol zeh. Now, however, even though it's completely removed, Yitakin inyan yeshiva l'mayla gamba melech yochid. You can apply the concept of yeshiva l'mayla also by the melech yochid, though he's completely beyond tzimtzum, beyond all the concealments. She'ein eid movade, because nothing is devoid of him. She'nikri Hisnaasus Atzmis, called a Hisnaasus, an exalted state on his own, not relative to something else. He's fundamentally of a different reality, a higher reality. V'yeshne gam ata. Okay, let's stop for a moment. Now he's going to explain how we have also a taste of this today. We talked about having through our avodah, we have a part of this. He's going to discuss that right now. But this is very, again, Mittler Rebbe style, a lot of ideas flowing pretty quickly, moving from topic, from item to item. But I think we have our seatbelts fastened to some extent, trying to make sense of it all. But again, I want to stop in case anybody's lost here, or you lost the plot or the flow. I'll be happy to clarify before I read on. Okay. Now he says, "V'yeshne gam ata." Though we're talking about la'ased lovi in the future, we have a taste of this. It doesn't say the word taste, but we have this also today. When we have a kabbalas el machal shamayim, be'el teira mitzvahs dafke, shenikra hadar malchusei ha'atzmis. When a person dedicates their life, kabbalas el literally means accepting the yoke of heaven upon us, or kabbalas el machal shamayim. When we accept the yoke of Torah mitzvahs, the bittul that we have, which is called Hadar Malchusei Ha'atzmis, the beauty or the splendor of his kingship, his core kingship. So then we are experiencing, if you want, an aspect of this. U'kamay b'Rosh Hashanah, like on Rosh Hashanah, she'emrim Yud Psukim de Malchus. When we say in Musaf, we say the 10 verses of Malchus. So we say 10 verses of Malchus, Zechrein Shefris, right? Malchus, the 10 verses, 3 from Chumash, Tanakh, from Torah, 3 from Nevi'im, and 3 from Ksuvim, and 1 more pasuk. So we say 10 psukim of Malchus in order that the Gemara says Shatam Lechuni Alecha, Dafke. In order to God, Shatam Lechuni, that God should rule over them, Dafke. Shalamayla melavush Malchus. So where are we drawing that Malchus from on Rosh Hashanah? Higher than the Malchus Shem is Samsam Lias Melech Al Kol HaElemus. Rosh Hashanah, we go back to the core source where we're stimulating, so to speak, an awakening and arousing the etzem of the Eibishter to want to rule over us. So he's saying we're reaching back into the Malchus Atzmis. That's higher than higher than Malchus as it's misamtzim to be a melech al kol ha'elemus. That's throughout the year. Shu rak b'bchinas hachitzenius ki Hisnaasus the Malchus d'Atzilus b'bria al asrofim v'chayis shezeyus mechayel kisei. B'chil kisei. So that the lower level is only an outer dimension of Hisnaasus HaMalchus. Like, for example, Malchus of Atzilus, that reigns over Bria. What's in Bria? The Seraphim, the angels that are called the fiery angels, and the Chayas, and they're also called the energy Chayas HaKodesh. They sweat from the intensity of the throne. That's the world of Bria. But that's Malchus as it relates to lower levels. Mashenkin b'chinas primius Malchus. On Rosh Hashanah, however, we reach the inner core of Malchus, ba'il Torah mitzvahs, shehem primius litzene or primius chachmosei mamish. That's the inner desire and the inner chachma mamish. V'hein kama yud psukim de Malchus shebetanach, and they are. That's why we say the yud psukim of Malchus of Tanakh of Torah Nevi'im and Ksuvim. Shemesham nimshach liyas melech geis lovish. From there we draw melech geis lovish, that the garment that he puts on and relates. Shenikra melech Yisrael, called the king of the Jews, v'lei melech hagoyim, which is higher than and not like melech hagoyim, the king of the nations. That's the uniqueness of Rosh Hashanah. So we see we're reaching a higher level. Why use Melech Geis Lovish? I think because we're drawing that higher level of Malchus into the lower level. So there's the lower level of Malchus, the Chitzenius, and I was talking about the Primius of Malchus. That's Melech Yisrael, higher than Melech Hagoyim. Zeu b'chinas yeshiva b'kisei haMalchus she'omar nochin kisecha ma'oz. And that's what we want to have. That God should settle in, should sit on on his throne of Malchus, Nochin Kesechem Oz, the Oz, which was referring to the Augustus level of Malchus of Ein Sof, that reaches the highest levels of Hisnaasus Atzmis. That's what we're drawing down to come in a settled, integrated state down below. And the continuous flow of the Mittler Rebbe. So let's continue. V'hainu, and this is. This means this is kamoy hayirida v'ashpolo l'remus ha'atzmus shemitzad atzmusei mamish. It's comparing this descent where he's coming down from the remus ha'atzmus is coming down from atzmus mamish li'esyeshiv al kisei ha'mishpat, to come sit on the throne of judgment. Lishpet al pi Torah ha'kedesha, that he should judge according to the Torah ha'kedesha, which is of course Hashem's Torah. That kings rule be in me or through me, be dafka. So in other words, he's saying this is all indicates on the higher level of Malchus coming down into the lower level to become melech. Yeah, who keser Malchus Atzmis Bereishis, and this is the crown of the king of the Malchus Atzmis Bereishis. That placed on his head, Keser, that is above his head, meaning is the highest level. Shenitin b'matan Torah. When we say by matan Torah, we were given the ksarim. And interestingly, this is the beginning of Ayin Beis. B'shah sheikdimu Yisrael nasav l'mishma. The beginning of Ayin Beis is that the Eibishter crafted for them three crowns. So by matan Torah, was given this crown, the Pnimius HaKeser, so the pasuk says the crown that was weaved by his mother when b'yem chasanosi, the day of his marriage, which was Matan Torah, v'zeu kumei moshel inyan hayeshiva. This is like the example of also of settling in, sitting down. Shekasher hamelech oimer d'reishei zokuf l'mayla. When the king stands, his head is upward. He's standing upright. When he sits, what happens? His head lowers itself to sit down into the chair, so his height is lowered. And the reish, which was completely above, standing upright, is now coming and being integrated. So we learned this as well. The head comes down, the feet come up actually when you sit. And that's this process of integrating and drawing down the highest levels down below. But this yeshiva is not like the one that comes after a tzimtzum, like he said before today. This yeshiva, in it, is manifest, melubish. Kol etzem harem is the primius ve'atzmis. The whole exalted, higher state of the core and the essence is manifest in this liyas gili atzmus b'teira mitzvahs, which draws down the gili of the core essence, core light in teira mitzvahs lamata mamish, down below mamish, kamoy lamaylo, as it is above b'shashui hamelech b'atzmus mamish. Like the delight, ve'eya shashrim lefonav, we speak about teira, which is the delights, all the way shashrim lefonav, the delights of the king that he keeps for himself, does not relate to existence at all. That is being drawn down below, that we now experience it. And that's the yeshiva, that you have exactly the etzem lamayla, that's how it comes down lamata below. Vidal, Vidai lamevin. So that was a pretty long, well, a pretty elaborate discussion on the concept of yeshiva, what yeshiva means, in the context of bringing down the highest levels of the divine, all the way down below, that you have that whole highest level of the eternal essence, all the way down below, without any dilution, which will be la'asid love. And today we have a taste of it, or experience of it, Rosh Hashanah, like he said. And yeah, okay. I'm going to stop here at the end of this paragraph, 428. Now, your turn. If you want to ask anything or clarify anything. I think now we did cover this topic, even though I see more about it coming, but so be it. We'll learn it next. But any questions or comments?
It's not connected directly, but the word Oz is eight. The Shmini is always being explained in the Rebbe Sichas that Shmini is Shemer HaHeket. It's above Hishtalshelus.
Yep. Yep, that's correct. Probably connected. You probably can connect it.
I think it's being used all the Yoshir, Moshe, others.
Okay. Anybody have any questions?
Just wow.
You said, wow? Yeah.
Yes, I said just wow.
I second the motion.
I hear. Okay. So we're all like blown away here, right? Yeah. Okay, we shall stop here. End of the paragraph on page 428. Review it again a few times to make sure it's clear. Yeah.